Shalom Aleichem, ich heiße Socia Fregel Fox und ich rede Yiddish. Yiddish ist nicht mein Mama-Lashon. Ich habe sich ausgelernt Yiddish, oder angehoben sich zu lernen Yiddish in 2013. Bin ich bin gewesen erst 24 und jetzt bin ich 31. Es ist noch halt relativ neu bei mir. Und ich bin eine Historikerin, was forscht amerikanische Geschichte. Jiddisch ist sehr nützlich bei mir, aber euch habe ich es lieb in allgemein.
Das is good. So, how did you learn Yiddish?
So, I started at a very unique place called the Yiddish Farm. Have you heard about it?
I think I've come across the name a couple of times. They have like the kind of like not the summer program, but it's like kind of almost like a retreat. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they have a summer program. I don't know if it's running this summer, obviously, but it's a farm in upstate New York where you can take Yiddish classes, and it's an immersive Yiddish-speaking environment, which means from day one, even if you don't speak a single word of Yiddish, you can't speak English or any other language at the farm. So my friend Naftali he's one of the founders of the farm. He no longer works there, but he was one of the founders, and he said, "Oh, you have to learn Yiddish for your doctorate. I'll teach you enough Yiddish in 2 weeks to pass your department's exam." And I said, "Okay, sign me up." Right? That sounds a lot more fun than a.
Yep.
Where did we get cut off?
You're talking about day one of speaking Yiddish.
Okay. So from day one, you're only allowed to speak Yiddish. My friend Naftali at the time, he was one of the founders of the farm, and he was still directing the farm. And he said to me, if you come to my farm, I will teach you enough Yiddish to pass your department's requirement, the sort of exam I had to take for my PhD in 2 weeks. And I said, 2 weeks? Sign me up. It sounds a lot more fun than going to an academic summer program when I'm doing academics, all year. And so my journey kind of started there, and the complete immersion really worked. I mean, obviously immersion has some drawbacks, like you can end up mimicking each other's Yiddish, and if you're a group of beginners with only a few fluent speakers at the place at any given time, you can end up copying each other's mistakes. But I think the pros outweighed the cons. A lot of us who went to the farm over the couple of years that it was the most active came out speaking fluent Yiddish, even if it required, more work, because it always does. And then I did some studying at NYU with this professor, Gennady Estreich, who's wonderful, and eventually did do some Yiddish summer programs, including the YIVO summer program and the Tel Aviv University summer program, which were both excellent. But I would say the truth is, a lot of my Yiddish learning was self-directed and involved just my social life. So in New York, especially at that time, in sort of 2014, 2015, 2016, probably reached a sort of peak of, 20-somethings, early 30-somethings speaking Yiddish. It still very much exists, it's still active, but it seems a lot of us moved away, or maybe there's a new generation coming up in our place, which is excellent. And so during that peak time, a lot of my social life was just happening in Yiddish. I've dated people in Yiddish for multiple years, and hosted Shabbat dinners in Yiddish. And so that was a unique opportunity to really get the language, more so than one would just in a class.
Mm-hmm. And did you grow up with like a Hasidic background, or not like a super conservative background?
I grew up a conservative Jew in the suburbs of Long Island. A lot of Yiddish words in the house, loan words, but no Yiddish speech. Even my grandparents don't speak Yiddish. They were all born in America. So for me, it was not sort of a lot of people come to Yiddish aiming to connect with a grandparent or have some sort of direct connection like that. My connection is further back in my family lineage, but I think that's why maybe I was a little surprised that emotionally Yiddish sort of like tugged at my heartstrings more than other languages that I've ever studied. And I speak Hebrew, I've studied French, German, Esperanto, Yeah, those are the main ones.
Mm-hmm.
And Yiddish is so far really the only one that I feel like connects you on a sort of emotional level that really motivates me. So Hebrew is practical for me. I'm in Israel right now. I'm in Israel a lot of the time. I have to use Hebrew, obviously, but it doesn't quite reach my heart in the way that Yiddish does.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever notice any sort of difficulty when studying Yiddish, like in terms of the fact that at least I know the Yiddish spoken, or that the Yiddish that's taught in most universities, right, is different than what you'll hear. For instance, I grew up in New York City, and so like hearing Yiddish in like Brooklyn, for instance, it's a big variation mixture of Yinglish pretty much, and so it's quite different, and especially the reading and spelling.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that Yiddish dialects are more mutually comprehensible than people think. Or,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't have any trouble communicating with Hasidim. They understand me. I understand them. I find that that's not a problem at all. But I think the bigger challenge with learning Yiddish is that you don't have a country to go to. So
Yeah.
anyone who studies practically any other language, not every language, but most languages, there's a country you can go to with a significant population of people who speak the language. So you take a couple courses and then you go and you immerse yourself. So with Yiddish, you can't immerse yourself in any country. You have to create Yiddish land for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, only doable in certain parts of the world. So New York is a big hub, but there are other cities in the U.S. with fairly substantial Yiddish kind of communities.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, there's a community in Germany, a community for sure in France. Australia has a big community. So there are pockets where you can sort of feel that Yiddish land feeling. But it's not as obvious as I pack up, I go to a country, and I come back with more fluency.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I think Yiddish has a lot of benefits. So, you go to, let's say, with Hebrew, you learn Hebrew in America or even in a program here, and then a lot of people experience the fact that Israelis don't want to speak to you in Hebrew. They know English really well, and they don't want to converse.
Yeah.
I no longer have that problem, and that's like an interesting kind of thing. Like, where's the cliff where you finally don't have that experience where people look at you like, oh, you're a foreigner, I don't want to speak to you in Hebrew, but for sure that's the experience in the beginning, and that's a really big hurdle. Whereas with Yiddish, although you don't have a country, and that is a problem, and you don't even have that big of a contemporary media or anything to sort of like immerse yourself in your own world, you do have Yiddishists, and Yiddishists who are these sort of passionate lovers of or promoters of Yiddish and Yiddish culture tend to really be very welcoming and engaging with people who are interested and kind of serious about making Yiddish part of their lives. So you don't have a country, but there is a community online and certainly in person in certain parts of the world where Yiddish lives, and those people are always happy to meet other people who want Yiddish to live. And so like another example of that is every summer, although this summer it'll be online, but that's also a good thing because more people can come, there is a Yiddish week. It's called the Yiddish Farm. It happens in Upstate New York. And it's basically a summer camp week for all ages. And again, completely Yiddish immersive. So while it's only 1 week, it fosters a community that exists sort of all year round. And in that week, we get to really experience this ideal of living in Yiddish all the time, but the community carries you through the rest of the year. So that there's a distinct disadvantage to the status of Yiddish in terms of a minority language and, nearly decimated after the Holocaust and all of that. But the upside is passionate lovers of Yiddish have a community and want people, are happy to bring more people in. That's the kind of the vibe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it helps.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can see how it helps. And one of the things I also you were talking about, finding a community that speaks the language. And I think you've also experienced that then if you've learned Esperanto, because there's no country that speaks Esperanto. Right. But which one? I want to know, first of all, which came first, Yiddish or Esperanto? And then how did you
I should say I did not get very serious about Esperanto.
Yeah.
It was a very short-lived project that I did with a now ex-boyfriend who's still a friend of mine, and he's a linguist who speaks, 13 languages, and Esperanto came out of probably both of our interests in Yiddish because Zamenhof, was himself a Yiddishist as well. So Yiddish is embedded into Esperanto, and I was interested in that. And it's a super easy language to learn. And I'm sort of interested in like linguistic nationalisms or linguistic cosmopolitanisms in history. So I didn't get far with it because it is very similar to Yiddish with needing this community. And I felt like I don't need a second language that's per se like this. But I'm glad I studied it just to be able to kind of read at least and have some knowledge, you know? Yeah.
And with Yiddish at least, all right, so going back to kind of community, did you find like a physical community, or was it more like virtual, since now everyone, you can kind of find people on whether it's a forum or online chats and stuff like that do speak Yiddish?
Right. I mean, in New York, there's definitely a physical community. Yeah. There's no question. And there's multiple. It's not even a singular one. I mean, there are Yiddishists I don't know. There are Yiddishists who are kind of cliques within the community. Not like cliques in a mean way, but just sort of closer groups of friends who hang out more than, I may hang out with them. And I have a cohort of friends, and perhaps it's divided by age or where you live in the city. So when I'm in New York, I do feel there's a physical community. If I want to have a Shabbat dinner with just Yiddish speakers, I certainly can. I can have 10, 20, whatever, use your imagination. We could have parties and whatever, there's enough of us. In Israel, there are Yiddishists, but there's very few of them who are really kind of interested in Yiddish from a vernacular perspective. So they're more culturally or like literarily interested in Yiddish. So they're still cool people to hang out with, but they're less interested in hanging out in Yiddish. And I think that's just partly because they have a Jewish language that's their everyday vernacular, and they don't connect to Yiddish the same way that maybe a diaspora Jew would. So here, if I want a social community in Yiddish in person, I can make that effort and invite people to hang out. And I think I used to do that more. And now I'm kind of in a place where I'm okay with that being a New York thing. I hang out with individual Yiddishists sometimes, but yeah.
Got it. And how do you think that speaking Yiddish or learning the language, and also any other language, for instance, that you said that you studied, has shaped who you are and like kind of the character that you've become?
Yeah. Well, I think that partly one of the reasons Yiddish connects for me is because I felt that it fits seamlessly into who I am. Whereas I always feel with Hebrew that to speak Hebrew fluently and to kind of embody Hebrew, I mean, even in my body language, it's not natural to me. It doesn't feel totally normal or natural. I don't have any other way to put it. It's sort of like, in order to be responded to in Hebrew, I actually need to change the way I interact with other people and my body language. Like, I'm otherwise read as American, and then that conversation either switches to English or it gets really, like, I don't know, awkward. Whereas with Yiddish, because it's a diaspora language and American Yiddish is a thing, not just Hasidim, but, America, Yiddish has been in America for, well over 100 years now. And, quite a long time. And so having, let's say, an American accent in Yiddish, while not necessarily ideal by everyone's standards, it's also pretty normal. A lot of people have an American accent. Or, if you're interacting with American Yiddishists, then you're all coming from sort of similar background in terms of how you relate in the world. So Yiddish doesn't feel foreign. At the same time, I think that Yiddish definitely makes me feel more connected to my family's heritage. I think growing up, as I did in a sort of Zionist household and Zionist youth movement, I was taught that Israel is my heritage, which maybe, but I mean, not really directly, you know.
Not emotionally, you'd say?
I would say emotionally when I was a kid, sure, because that was kind of what I was taught.
Yeah.
It was my heritage, and I felt very connected to it. But, in actuality, like, I'm not from here. I come here and I feel foreign, and that's after many years of being here and being married to an Israeli. Like, I'm still foreign. So, I think when I learned Yiddish, what I didn't expect to gain from it was a deep understanding of my own roots. And I think one of the mistakes in my experience in American Jewish education, not my mistake, but the mistake of kind of the Jewish community, is erasing diaspora heritage and instead focusing on Israel as a kind of counterpoint to, let's say, the suffering endured by Jews over the course of history. But there's also all these things that happened that didn't have to do with suffering, like, literature and music and art and women's prayer and all these different parts of Jewish history that were sort of, I don't want to say erased, but certainly skipped over. And I think it's because people don't really even know about it. And Yiddish unlocks that. So, like, how that impacts my personality or my character, it's hard to say, but it definitely impacts my view of the world or my view of my own identity.
It kind of builds that connection, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And now I feel like I can relate. I feel like I have a better understanding of Jewish culture, not just with Yiddish too. I think it opened me up to other diaspora Jewish cultures that I hadn't given a lot of thought to before, like Mizrahi or kind of, Sephardi Jewish culture, which is a whole other world, and Ladino and Judeo-Arabic. The fact that Jews spoke these languages, like modern Hebrew, was not the spoken vernacular, obviously, but you wouldn't necessarily know that entering into a lot of Jewish educational spaces, at least when I was growing up. So the whole world to know a diaspora Jewish language, for sure.
And I guess taking it a step back to how you learn the language, is there something that you would have done maybe differently in terms of learning the language? Because I know that you don't learn a language in 2 weeks, but you can get a pretty good immersion, like you said, and then ultimately continue the study maybe through a textbook or through someone else, through speaking and stuff. But is there anything that you might have done differently?
That's hard to say. Differently. I mean, look, now that I'm in a different life stage, I'm like, wow, I really should have spoken exclusively Yiddish with my then boyfriend, because, and we're still friends, and that's great, but like that was a really, even speaking Yiddish the amount I did, like 30, 40, 50% of the time with him, obviously got me to the level I'm at. And to think about how, even though it would have been very hard, like how much better my Yiddish would be today if I had just stuck to like full immersion. I'm not sure that's realistic, but definitely like maybe I feel that allowing myself to be comfortable in a place of immersion, I wish I had done more of that, so that I would speak Yiddish better now when I don't have the chance to be as immersed. But like otherwise, I don't think I have any regrets. And I think the good thing about language learning is it doesn't really have to ever stop. I'm not stopping now, so whatever mistakes I made, I can still correct over time.
Yeah, you got it. And talk a little bit real quick about your podcast, because I've seen it and it's really good content in terms of like, I like how it's just, it breaks away completely from what I'd expect anything in Yiddish to be about. And so yeah, just feel free to like chat about that and kind of how you got started and why you even got started.
Yeah, so I mean, what you said surprised you is exactly what I wanted to happen. I really wanted a Yiddish media that wasn't really about Yiddish. So just in Yiddish, normal, like any other language would have, like content about other things. And I wanted that for myself. I wanted that for my friends. And I said, okay, well, someone has to do it. I guess it'll be me. And I thought, maybe, I don't know, a few dozen people will listen to it. I didn't know how long I would do it, maybe 10 episodes, but here we are nearing, I think, 50, and we have thousands of listeners around the world. So it's a really exciting thing. I think, I'm a lover of podcasts and radio. I think one of the biggest challenges with learning Yiddish is passive, sort of learning how to understand Yiddish in a passive way. You can't just turn on the radio and listen to Yiddish. I mean, that's such a gift that most other languages, it's obvious that you can just find a radio station online and listen to that in that language. Yiddish doesn't really have that, so it needs to be created from the ground up. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome about it, because when I started it, I guess I'd only been learning Yiddish for 3 years or something, and that's kind of crazy. So I really listen to those old episodes and I go, oh God, I can't believe this is what I put out into the world, and that people might learn Yiddish from me back then. I mean, even now my Yiddish isn't perfect, but back then it really wasn't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, by doing the podcast, I've been able to continue to have a Yiddish social world and like context, no matter where I am, whether that's in New York or Tel Aviv or elsewhere where I might not have as many Yiddish connections. So it's worked for me on a personal level, but I think it does help people. I think a lot of young Yiddish speakers use the podcast to learn, and I'm just really glad I'm able to get like a variety of different kinds of Yiddish on the podcast. So that's a big goal of mine is, you'll hear Hasidic Yiddish one episode, and you'll hear Polish Yiddish one episode, and you'll hear a native speaker who grew up in the 90s and a native speaker who grew up in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Mm-hmm. And that gives you a sense of just the variety of people's Yiddish, but also, like I said, how mutually comprehensible they actually are. I've never gotten feedback about the show of like, I can't understand this person. Like, the more you try, the more you can. Mm-hmm. So those are sort of the, in terms of using Vaybertaytsh as a pedagogical tool, I think that's one of its benefits. So that's also really nice. But I didn't create it to kind of it with a pedagogy in mind. I created it with media and fun and like enjoyment in mind, and I still hope it achieves that goal for people too. That's its purpose.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything that you would say to anyone who wants to learn Yiddish? What advice you'd give them from your past experience, or maybe again like what you thought maybe you not did differently, but something that someone might want to consider when studying the language?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of people go into learning languages in general thinking that like once a week for an hour or two a class is going to work. And I think it can if you're highly motivated and you spend a lot of time outside of that class working. But if you really want to learn Yiddish, the best way to do it is to go to a Yiddish summer program, because those programs really allow you to live in Yiddish land for the duration of the program. And there's nothing better for learning a language than that. So I would say start there. Any of them is fine. Obviously, this summer with coronavirus, all of them are online, so that has pros. It also has a lot of cons. Mm-hmm. So maybe you do it this summer beginners level, and you go next summer beginners 2 or intermediate. I think I definitely recommend learning Yiddish. I think it's fascinating language to learn, not just for Jews, also I think for lots of different people. Linguistically, it's interesting in the ways that it's a sort of amalgamation between all these different languages. The culture is really vibrant and fascinating, and I don't know. I mean, in terms of mistakes, I guess I would just say it's not my mistake per se, but I've made this mistake with other languages. Sort of learn the language you really want to learn. So don't learn Yiddish just because I'm telling you to, or because you feel you should, because maybe you have an Ashkenazi cultural background, but because something inside you had like brought you to that language, because if not, you really might as well learn something else. And the same, I would say, for people who say, oh, well, I can't learn Yiddish. I would love to learn Yiddish, but I can't because it's not practical. Well, if you're not motivated to learn a practical language, then it's futile.
Yeah,
learn
exactly.
The language that speaks to you. So, I would love to learn fluent Spanish or Chinese, sure, but I don't seem to have the motivation to actually take that logical thought and turn it into reality. And so I'm going to stick to doing the things that do kind of get me excited.
Yeah, of course. That's I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's the biggest thing that resonates with me, is that I don't study a language because it's practical per se, but because I genuinely enjoy it. Right. So I think that's very important. So yeah,
people think about languages so in such a binary way in terms of that whole practical thing. I just don't understand it, because I do understand if you're going to invest incredible time, you want it to have some sort of purpose in your life. But again, it's like, usually if you don't actually genuinely want to do it, you're not going to learn it anyway.
Yeah, so. For sure. Awesome. Well, that's about all for this video. It was actually a really nice, juicy 25-minute interview. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Yeah.
And so if you have any last thoughts or any last things you want to say.
No, just learn Yiddish. And if you want to learn Yiddish and you need more resources, if you want to learn Yiddish and you need resources, you can always reach out to me or other Yiddish media or organizations. We're all friendly and here to help you. So you can reach me at Vaybertaytsh@gmail.com, which I won't spell out, but maybe you can.
Yeah, I'll edit it on. Awesome. And I'll leave a link to your podcast as well, because I really encourage everyone to check it out. It's amazing. It's very interesting. It's very interesante, you know? So it's awesome.
And there are a couple English episodes just to give a little taste, mostly for my friends and family who don't speak Yiddish, but if anyone's interested in if they're not going to learn Yiddish, but they want to hear something of what we do, there's that. That's
awesome.
an option.